and welcome back to Rainbow Roundtable. I'm your host, Frank Sanchez, and we're here to delve into a compelling issue facing today's educational landscapes. Misinformation. Specifically, we'll be examining the intersection of misinformation, the teaching of history, and LGBTQ plus issues. We have a remarkable panel of experts, educators, and students who are at the forefront of tackling these challenges.
Why is this so important? We're in an age where information is at our fingertips, but discerning fact from fiction has never been more vital, especially for our educators, who are charged with preparing the next generation to navigate this complex world with critical thinking skills. So let's dive into what's coming up on today's show.
In the first segment, we'll take a journey back in time to understand the roots of misinformation, particularly as it relates to the teaching of history and LGBTQ plus issues. From the erasure of significant LGBTQ plus figures to the denial or revision of key events, this is a new battle. We'll discuss landmark moments that have shaped the trajectory of these issues and provide a historical framework to better understand challenges.
As we move into the heart of our episode, we won't be sharing specific real-world stories, but rather we'll imagine fictional scenarios that represent the very real challenges faced by teachers and students in Florida. Picture this: a classroom where a teacher is wrestling with how to balance state mandates that aim to control information while also providing an accurate and inclusive account of history, or consider students collaborating to question and debunk conspiracy theories, especially those that target the LGBTQ plus community. These imagined yet realistic stories give us a lens through which we can discuss on-the-ground issues educators and students face daily.
In this segment, our panelists will offer concrete tools and strategies to design to counter misinformation and to foster more inclusive educational environment. From role-playing exercises that demystify mechanics of misinformation to using open-source educational materials that provide multiple perspectives, there's a lot to gain here. We'll talk about how these can adapt to address the unique needs and challenges of LGBTQ plus students as well.
As we wrap up, we'll engage in a future-oriented discussion, the issue of misinformation, especially as it impacts the teaching of history and LGBTQ plus issues, isn't going away overnight. But there are glimmers of hope. In this segment, we'll explore possible future scenarios where schools and teachers adapt, policy changes are made, and students become more empowered and discerning consumers of information. Now, to help us understand the complexities of what Florida teachers and students face over LGBTQ plus issues, today we draw on a large variety of talent and experiences and representation. First, this is Frank Sanchez, a teacher and Safe Schools board member. He is my anchor partner today of Safe Schools Rainbow Roundtable. Welcome, Frank.
Hi, Liz. How are you?
Hi, Frank. Good, and you?
I'm good.
Now, let's welcome Vivian Diaz. Vivian is a proud Miami-Dade County Public Schools alumni and mom of two current students. She is deeply involved in school life, dedicated to fostering inclusivity for all. Welcome, Vivian.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me, Frank and Liz. I'm very honored to be here.
We are very happy to have you.
Thank you.
Next, let's add the perspective of a journalist. This is Hatzel Vela, respected Emmy Award-winning journalist at WPLG Television ABC Local 10. He specializes in education, Latin America, and Cuba. In January 2017, Hatzel became the first local television journalist in the country to move to Cuba and cover the island from the inside. Welcome, Hatzel.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Very happy to have you here. Next, welcome the streaming television host, Tiffany Williams. She hosts Tiffany Explains It All for Safe Schools. Welcome, Tiffany.
Hi, Liz. I'm so looking forward to the discussions today.
I am too. So happy to have you, Tiffany. Next, let's welcome Harold Marrero. He is the Chief Operating Officer of Safe Schools and Executive Producer for Safe Schools Rainbow Roundtable. Welcome, Harold.
Hi, Liz and Frank. Thank you for having me on today, and I'm very excited for the conversations that we're going to have.
We're very happy to have you here, Harold. Thank you for everything.
Glad to have you.
Yeah.
And finally, let's welcome Liz Morales. Liz has been an educator for Dade County's public schools for the past 17 years and has served as the GSA sponsor for the past 14 years. Liz is a trombonist for the South Florida Pride Concert Band, where she has also served as a youth trombone coach. Liz is Vice Chair of Safe School South Florida on the Board of Directors and my co-anchor for today's Safe School Rainbow Roundtable. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you.
Thank you, panelists, for these fantastic introductions. It is clear that we have a wealth of experience and diverse perspectives here today. Now let's dig into the roots of our topic. On to our historical overview segment. Before we plunge into the depths of today's challenges around misinformation, it's important to understand the context in which these issues have grown. And in order to fully appreciate the context, we need to take a stroll down memory lane.
Misinformation isn't a new phenomenon, especially when it comes to LGBTQ plus issues. The history of misinformation around this particular subject is rich and complicated, dating back centuries and deeply rooted in systematic prejudices and taboos.
For instance, consider the early to mid-20th century. In this period, the so-called Lavender Scare in the United States saw LGBTQ plus people being painted as security risks, a smear that often cost them their jobs and even their homes. Publications from that era often framed being LGBTQ plus as a mental disorder, something that needed to be cured, which we now know is not just incorrect, but damaging.
Fast forward to the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s and 1990s. Misinformation then was rampant. Many people were led to believe that AIDS was a gay disease, stigmatizing a whole community and hampering effective responses to the crisis. In fact, this is used as a way to legitimize discrimination against the LGBTQ plus community. Even schools contributed to this by shying away from inclusive sexual education, fueling ignorance, and consequently prejudice.
We also see history be rewritten to exclude LGBTQ plus figures and contributors. We'd be surprised to find that many students don't learn about the Stonewall Riots in their history classes, or about the activism of figures like Marsha P. Johnson or Harvey Milk. Their roles are often silenced or erased entirely in heteronormative narrative of history.
Understanding this history not only provides us with a clearer picture of where we are today, but also helps us strategize for what lies ahead. If we know how misinformation has been weaponized in the past, especially against marginalized communities like the LGBTQ+, we can be better prepared to fight it in the present.
So let's turn to our panel with a couple of thought-provoking questions. How has historical misinformation around LGBTQ issues impacted our current educational system? And are there specific moments in history that you think are pivotal for our students to know about in order to understand these complexities of misinformation and LGBTQ plus issues? Let's unpack these questions and more. Panel, over to you.
Yeah, well, thank you for all those questions and really guiding us to this topic. And, you know, I remember when I was in school, particularly in high school, we took a lot of history courses and we just learned a lot of information, but rarely did we ever learn about the influence that queer individuals have had on our society, and in society in the West in particular. We learned about Alan Turing, but I had to learn by myself that he was a queer man, and even after he was fundamental in us winning World War II against the Nazis, he wasn't respected, and what happened to him afterwards was really, really sad. So that's something that we didn't learn. I had to learn about myself, and I wish that more of that was taught in schools. And I never had learned about Harvey Milk in high school. I never learned about Marsha P. Johnson. We didn't learn about the Stonewall Riots. I mean, there's a lot of things we didn't learn about.
To piggyback on what he said, because we went to school around the same time, I completely agree with him. I did not know anything about Harvey Milk. I did not know anything about Marsha P. Johnson, the Stonewall Riots, until after high school, where I sought out that information for myself to better educate myself around LGBTQ issues, which back when I graduated in 2005, that's when gay marriage was just becoming legal, when these issues were coming just to the forefront, in a more public way, and it was just shocking to me, I felt so ignorant afterwards, wow, there's so much I don't know, even though I have, I graduated from a really good high school. I went to AP history classes, I had really good teachers, but when you're in an AP class, they're teaching for a test. They're not going to be delving into these side, So it was very, it was a very eye-opening experience for me as a student to like learn, wow, there's so much more that I could have learned and I didn't, and like that I had to seek out that information for myself and become interested and start reading about Harvey Milk's life, and as an example, or Marsha P. Johnson, Stonewall Riots, the AIDS epidemic, all these things that the AIDS epidemic happened when as I was a child growing up. There was so much misinformation going on that afterwards, as I grew up, and I was like, wow, that's just not true.
Mm-hmm.
And the effects of the AIDS epidemic, in misinformation lives to this day, where gay men couldn't donate blood because of that misinformation that was going on for so long.
Yeah.
And it's just shocking to me. And like, now that I'm watching my kids grow up in the school system, it's like, is it like I'm taking it as a responsibility of my own to make sure I supplement what they're not being taught in schools so that they don't have that gap in knowledge that I had.
I think you can turn this also into a wider context over civil rights and how civil rights are portrayed in history books, right? And from a journalist perspective, we're having a debate right now about African American history and how that should be taught in schools. And so it's interesting that here we are talking about queer history that's not taught in schools, and we're still struggling about the idea of African American history or how it's taught in schools. I mean, I think that's fascinating, the two side by side, and looking at both of those issues, and the fact that here we are talking about both of them in 2023 is fascinating.
Yeah.
So as a history teacher, and I've been teaching for this is my 28th year. History has always been taught from the perspective of Western European white, culture and their contributions. And then as I've taught history on this, we went from the minorities, whether it's women, African American, LGBTQ has never been part of it. It was, you would have the regular textbook and there would be a little blurb on the side, and that was the inclusive. We would throw, and like, oh, there's, this minority person, there's this person. And it was just very, that's why they are. We since moved to, we're going to have to include them more. And our history books have not really changed. Our history books do not include other perspectives other than Western white of our founding fathers. Every once in a while, they'll throw somebody in there, but that is not the focus. And I know that we have special months like African American History Month, and we have Women's History Month, and we have Pan-Asian History Month, and we have all these different months. And even then, it's just, all right, we talk about it a little bit, but we are bound by our pacing guides. And our pacing guide says, you have to cover this topic from this day to this day. And then the next, you got to move from this day to this day. So it's very hard to, and they don't tend to focus on the contributions of minorities, even before all this new legislation. So it's just how it's just been. And I think for history to be inclusive and education needs to be inclusive, that needs to happen. In our school, we offer a women's history class because it is not part of the regular curriculum. We offer a Holocaust history class because it's not part of the curriculum. The Holocaust is taught like in a day or two in our classes. So we have these special classes for that. And we don't see African American studies, and we don't see queer studies, we don't see Latino studies as offered in our schools, which is sad.
Yeah. I think I went to school a little later on in life, so I do agree, there was not enough when I was in school of like actually getting to go into like activisms like the Stonewall Riots, Marsha P. Johnson, Harvey Milk, all that. But I also agree with Frank that there were just like little snippets, little information, just in case anyone was like actually curious, but it wasn't enough to like actually, again, start up the conversation, dive into that. And I think now more than ever, as a social media person, like TikTok is like the biggest thing. I know everyone's probably heard that before, but like I have seen it where like you will have like Black History Month, Women's History Month, Hispanic History Month, all these like times of the year where like I just see nothing but like my For You page, which is just videos after videos of like different people, activism, artists, and getting to see some of the history. And I'm like, it's so amazing that social media, we use it for like entertainment, but it's can be so informative, even more informative than school to a certain degree, you know? I think it's very upsetting that you have people in these educational systems and also legislation like positions, and they're kind of like just trying to cover up. They're trying to like erase all these minorities, all these other people, that it wasn't all this pretty picture. And I think people don't want to listen to what the real history was because it makes them feel uncomfortable. And it's like, but that should empower you to change so that we don't go back, so that we don't keep making the same mistakes. And hence the phrase of, you know, you have to know your history so you don't repeat history.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I remember that I learned about GRID, that AIDS was originally called GRID from Grey's Anatomy. Watching when they went back in time, an episode went back in time, and they were talking about it, and I'm like, what is GRID? I thought it was something they made up for the show, so I looked it up, and there you have it, gay-related immunodeficiency disease, or I think that's how it laid out. And I was shocked that they call it GRID, and I didn't learn that in high school. I mean, like Vivian was saying, we are children of the 80s, so we grew up with it, and I mean, I can tell you, I can write a book on the misinformation that my parents gave me about AIDS. You know, like the moment that you came out, you were gonna just get AIDS. There was no even HIV. It's just like you come out of the closet, you have AIDS. That was it. And then you die before 30. That's what I was told. And that was, obviously it's not true. And it's something that, you know, it had to have come from, and also ER. ER did a bunch of episodes relating to AIDS, and one of the main characters gets HIV, and then she's put on the medication, and she was a straight woman. You know, she got it from her husband, who was a drug user. So it changed the narrative. Here you have a main character that's not gay, that's not, you know, that poor sob story that we always saw, and that changed the narrative. It made me less afraid of HIV because I was seeing it play out in a show. So yeah, I wish the schools would have taught me this. I wish that, you know, this would have been done in a different way, but I had to have learned it from TV.
And the problem is that if it's not taught in school, it's taught somewhere, because you brought up the TikTok thing, right? So TikTok is very useful in a lot of ways, right? Because kids can learn so much, but at the same time, there's so much misinformation in social media, whether it's TikTok or Instagram. And kids do not know the process of what it's like to sort of take some information and then make sure that it's accurate and correct. And so what you have is, yes, there's a lot of good information out there, but how do you know it's true or not? And that's where sort of the classroom comes in, because that's where teachers can really curate and figure out and tell them, hey, this is what the facts are, and this is how we're going to teach it. And this is real. This is the real world.
And sometimes kids have questions and we can't answer them because we can't discuss that in our classrooms.
That's right.
I teach reading, and we have to have our books scanned. So I used to have a library with a lot of books, like hundreds of books. So now, since we have an independent section of our program, the ones that we use, it has to be those specific books. But sometimes the kids are like, oh, can I read this book? And I'm like, no, you can't. You have to use the ones that are there. You know, so it's kind of sad, that are approved.
It's unfortunate that it's come to this point, and you know, it was interesting what you were saying earlier about the parallel between the whole African American history thing. Were any of us taught about the Tulsa riots?
Nope.
Were any of us taught about,
Nope.
Like, did we know anything? When did this all start coming? That really started making it when Watchmen came out.
Yes, that's exactly it.
Yeah, so
I learned about the Tulsa riots through Watchmen.
Exactly. And it's like a part of me is like, wow, I'm glad that this came out, but another part of me is like, man, I'm in my 30s, and this is when I'm learning about such pivotal moments in our history, and it's like, if that's being erased, how much more? And what can we do to combat that? Because it starts in the schools, but then, I mean, my parents are immigrants. They wouldn't know about any of that. So, like, you know, it starts like now with my children. I know that I have to kind of supplement that. But, you know, it's just really unfortunate that it's come to this point where, you know, we can't have these open and having these lessons that enrich. It won't take away anything. The white heteronormative Western perspective can't be the only one that's being taught. You know, and to me, it's very important that that, you know, we try to find a way to fight back and like make sure that we are inclusive to everyone to make sure it's being
So
taught.
does it start in the home and in the classroom? Where does that activism, as a journalist, where does that activism start?
I think there's to me, I see it that they both kind of peak together at some point. I think it does take a lot of like introspection, not just from the parents, but also like from the teachers, because there are teachers that aren't part of like those certain communities, but they can be allies. And how do you become an ally? How do you help these people? And talking about these subject matters that are happening, that did happen, in a way that you're not going to get in trouble. Unfortunately, that's where we're at now. It didn't used to be that way. But the fact that now it's like, okay, I have to talk about this in a certain aspect. And there are parents. I mean, it's good to see that there are parents that are allies and that are willing to, put themselves in the student position with their own kids of like, okay, well, if this is what you're covering, let me also look up, let me look online, educate myself a little bit, and, maybe even have a conversation with your student's teacher and kind of being like, well, this is what I want. And, if it's a parent and a teacher talking together, I feel like there's more room to talk about than versus with a minor or student.
Yeah.
I think one of the issues of parents' lack of information is at least in my school, a lot of parents are not from this country.
Yep.
So they don't know this country's history because they came as adults, so they did not go to the educational system in our country. So they will never know about the Tulsa or the Rosewood or Marsha P. Johnson or any of these people because that's not what they grew up with. So when their child comes home to like, I don't know. So it would be up to the parent to educate themselves. But parents are busy. Parents have lives.
Yes.
Parents have to take care of this. And to add this other thing for them to do, it's nice, but I don't know how realistic it would be because, parents have to work and then they have to come home, take care of the kids and help with homework and clean the house and all that stuff. And I don't know how realistic it would be for parents to do. And it's not that they're not well-meaning, it's not that they don't want to, it's just...
It's definitely from a place of being able to do so, having the resources to be able to do so, being able to discern misinformation to make sure that my child gets accurate information. It's definitely from a place of like, I'm able to do this for my child. I know that not every parent has the ability to do that, whether it be because of time constraints, because they have to work, because they have other children that need to be taken care of. So there's a multitude of things. I can say from my perspective, what I'm personally doing with my two kids, but definitely I know it's from a place of my own privilege that I'm able to do that for them.
And I do feel like teachers, and we have the teachers here today, but teachers are at the front lines of this, and teachers are the gatekeepers of this information. And yes, right now there is the government, government policies, and Tallahassee is utilizing its tools to try to keep things out of history, change history a little bit to favor the oppressors, and banning books that you all now have to really look at and find creative solutions for this. And I don't know what those are. I'm just talking right now in this space, but there has to be a way that we can creatively resist and kind of gear the students that want to learn, because let's face it, there will be students that just want to go through it and that's just what they're going to do. I mean, I was one of those kids that I wanted to learn. So if a teacher would have given me like a book that said, hey, you should read this, like this is good for you to read, I would have read it and I would have been the better for it. And in my life in particular, teachers were the ones that constantly saved me throughout the school system when I was in school, because my parents just come from Cuba. They had no idea what they were doing. Like, they didn't know the system, and I had to fend for myself, but I had teachers that constantly got in the way to protect me and to move me to certain places that I need to move. So that's why I feel like teachers have so much power and so much capacity for goodness. I just don't, in this stage that where we are in this country, I don't want them to get in trouble, but at the same time, I want to see if there are creative solutions for this.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I mean, they say all politics is local, right? So where do you start? You start at the local level, at the school district level, and so because they obviously, while they cannot say what goes into the classroom in terms of what books, because that's set by the state from what I understand. The district does have some flexibility in how they teach and what courses they teach. And I believe that that's where you start at the school district, specifically when you have school districts in Miami-Dade or Broward. They have to think about their audience and who their audience is and what kind of population lives in these neighborhoods that would be get advantage over having certain material and certain books. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So maybe you start there, but how does it translate into Tallahassee? That's the disconnect, it seems.
So like I said, I personally teach a class that's half a year of Holocaust studies and half a year is women history, and that's it's not taught in every school. It's just taught in my school. And other schools can offer that, but you need someone who's willing to take that on. And that is a course that is approved by the district, which has to be approved by Tallahassee. And I have a lot of freedom to cover things in those classes. And I go deeply into the Holocaust and I go deeply into the issues of women's history. But no one ever talks about queer history. And we don't talk about queer history because, one, we don't have a lot of teachers who are out. It was, teachers being out back in the day would mean you would lose your job.
Right.
So people would not be comfortable being out. I'm an out, gay man. I sponsor the GSA at my club. My students know that I am gay and have a relationship. It's not something I discuss in my classroom because, it's not really part of history. It's not part of stuff. But we don't have people fighting to teach queer history. We don't have that representation. So it's not pushed for. It's not pushed for in the district. It's not pushed for in Tallahassee. And we, if we want to be inclusive, we need to start pushing it because it's not going to be in the history books. Even before everything, don't say gay or any other stuff, we were never part of the conversation.
Right.
And we started to be part of the conversation, but we're only part of the conversation a little bit. We need, with Don't Say Gay, it makes it a lot harder to start that conversation and be part of that conversation. And one of the ways I see it fixing is voting.
Yeah.
Voting. It's voting.